everyone. Welcome to this episode where we're going to be talking about being Native and white and the complexity of white passing and staying strong in your Native identity. And I have the honor and pleasure of having this conversation with these two beautiful women that I have really has been a part of my journey, of being stronger in my Native American Osage Nation identity and feeling empowered to actually wanting to lead and really be involved, I think, in not only the needs of our Native youth, but in the learning of our cultures and traditions and history. So I will allow you to introduce yourselves in the way that feels good to you, but if you could also share how you racially identify and anything important you just really want the audience to know for them, for this conversation that we're going to have today. So I'll go ahead and begin with Carrie.
Nyawa Tracy. Sego, Sewa Guego, Skenangoa, Carrie Huff Chesnick, Oniota Aga, Wolf Clan. So greetings, everybody. My name is Carrie Chesnick. I'm Oneida Nation, Wisconsin, from the reservation at Green Bay, and I'm Wolf Clan. And that is how I identify, is as an Oneida or Haudenosaunee woman. And I would say I'm coming a little bit more to this place of being able to say that in an introduction, even working my way up to saying, I am a biracial woman. My father is Slovenian through his parents, and my mom is Oneida. So yeah, that's where that's at. Thank you, Nyawa.
Thanks, Carrie. Amanda?
Tanshe Kia Wow, Amanda Dishnakashon. So I said hello. My name's Amanda, and I am a citizen of the Little Shell band of Chippewa Indians, and I'm also Turtle Mountain Chippewa. So Little Shell is in Montana. Turtle Mountain is in North Dakota. My dad is from Turtle Mountain, so from Belcourt, North Dakota, and so that is where my connection is mostly. And my dad is Michif, and that is actually the language is Michif too that I just introduced myself in. And so Michifs are also known as Métis. So it's like half breeds, mixture of like Chippewa, Cree, some other tribes, also, and then also French. And I also have some Scottish from my dad's side. My mom is German, and she's from Nebraska, and so I have all my my mom's side family is mostly like in the Midwest, and they're farmers, and I'm a mom and an educator.
I just learned we have even more in common, because my dad's side, he's the one who is Osage Native, but his father is also Midwest farmers that originally came from Kentucky into Oklahoma area. So I didn't even know that about you, Amanda. See?
Yeah.
Our identities are complex. And so I wanted to share, so I am, Osage Nation, currently in Oklahoma. My father, he was born in New Jersey. At some point in their multiple travels across the country, with my grandfather being more of a tradesman, a plumber, electrician, chasing the work where it landed. At one point, lived on the reservation in near Pawhuska, Oklahoma, for a very short amount of time. Other than that, um, I think his parents' generation, right, was very much about assimilation, kind of getting away from the reservation, getting away from the language and traditions. And so I don't even think my grandmother was taught the language. And my dad wasn't taught much of the traditions. And so then therefore coming to me, have almost zero, knowledge of kind of my tribal history outside of, once I was in middle school doing like a social studies project, learning about it. And then little things, people would pass and we would go to, funerals, and there would be some traditions we would learn there or things I can recall remembering. But other than that, it's been really like a sore spot for me of like not having that. It was a part in my development of my racial consciousness where I got really angry of like understanding what colonialism is, understanding that my great grandfather went to a boarding school, just feeling like that part of me was robbed, from me, and that I had nowhere to point the anger because I couldn't be mad at my parents and I couldn't be mad at my grandmother, because it was a survival. It was to survive. Um, and it was harm due to them, right? Not necessarily a choice that they had. And so one of the first things I wanted to ask you is, what is your story around how you've learned and continue to learn about your Native identity, history, and traditions? Because we know that that's not, up until recently, wasn't taught in K through 12 education system. Whoever wants to jump in, go first. Feel free.
Mandy, you want to start?
Okay. Sure. So from when I was born, I feel like I've had a strong connection, just because, so my dad, like I said, my dad's from North Dakota, my mom's from Nebraska. So we often went back to North Dakota and Nebraska to visit family. And so we would be back on the reservation. So I was fortunate to be able to spend a lot of time out there with my family, and kind of our land and our people out there. So that was just always kind of there. And so like stories, and I'm also very close to my, I grew up very close to my grandparents, my grandma and grandpa on my dad's side, and then also my grandma, my German grandma. And so hearing their stories, the way that my family, my dad ended up out here in Seattle, I knew that story. I knew somebody gave them money and train tickets. It wasn't until I was an adult until I realized it was a government. It was the government that sent them out during an Indian relocation in the 50s, to try to remove natives from reservations into bigger cities. So there's hubs that were that the natives were sent to, Seattle being one of them. And I knew my family was sent originally to Denver and were pretty much homeless and had to go back home. But then they had family out here in Seattle and friends that they were able to live with and establish themselves here. But so my grandparents always went back every chance they could, back home. And then my dad continued that. And then also like our connection. So like I was able to connect with the tribes out here growing up here, just to use like mostly the dentist, but also like healthcare. So like Muckleshoot is the tribe like that I grew up like closest to. And then I was in the Native education program in high school, which like inspired me to go into Native education. And so throughout school, throughout high school, and then in college, I was in a Native program. I was in a special program, connected with the Native groups there, had my Native counselor through college, and studied American Indian Studies, and then in graduate school did a program for teachers of Native American learners. So I think just that connection with Native community that is where I've like learned so much, and of course my family, and just this like constant support like throughout my life from the Native community.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. A lot. That's a lot of support. Yeah.
Mhm.
How about you, Carrie? Thanks, Amanda.
Yeah.
Yeah, my story is more zero support for most of my life. Tracy, I'm going to ask, would you read the question again? Just
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What is your story around how you've learned and continue to learn about your Native identity, history, and traditions?
mm-hmm. So that break that Mandy was talking about with the boarding school, that would have been a lot around the grandparents on my mother's side. Her parents and her grandparents. So Oneida, well, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, let's just back up a minute and go, because we're so a part of this country's story of identity and independence. So our chief, Shenandoah, was friends with George Washington and some of the colonists. And when the war came, when the American Revolution started, it was the worst thing for the Confederacy. It broke the Confederacy apart. So Mohawk went north with the Brits into Canada because their chief's son, Joseph Brant, had grown up in a British household. And we stayed and went with Washington and Valley Forge and the colonists. And because of that decision, we signed a treaty really, really early on. The Treaty of Canandaigua is 1779. And wasn't even 20 years later. And they were already, the state of New York was already moving us, Oneida specifically, out of our homelands because they wanted our water and they wanted our land. And so in 2 waves, they took most of the families from our home in New York to Wisconsin, on land that both the Menominee and the Ho-Chunk gave up so that we would have a place to be. And we purchased that land and then had to repurchase it again after the Dawes Act. The point of all of that is that Oneida was assimilated pretty early on. When we were moved, we were not allowed to farm. So Haudenosaunee people are farmers. We migrated from South and Central America, I believe. We have corn, beans, and squash essential to our culture. So, you don't just get dropped in upstate New York with corn. So at any rate, we had a very sophisticated system of food sovereignty, food growing, food preservation, all of it, complete with ceremony, complete with songs for every stage, right? When we planted, and so we sang to the seed when we planted, and we have green corn and we have strawberry, and all those ceremonies that celebrate the gifts that have been given to us. And so when we were moved to Wisconsin, we lost all of that. We had to set it down. We were not allowed to farm in our traditional manner. We weren't allowed to use our language. We weren't allowed to sing. We weren't allowed to do any of those pieces. And
Mhm.
so that came pretty early on. And the resurgence started shortly before I was able to go back home and become enrolled. And so we had folks in our nation that went back. So we're reclaiming a lot. In the beginning, I learned a lot through, because my mom doesn't know anything, and she actually was not all that interested in her heritage. She really was assimilated.
Mhm.
So consequently, I knew kind of who I was, but it wasn't allowed. My identity as a Haudenosaunee person, as a Native girl, was
Mhm.
not allowed in my family.
Mhm.
So pretty much erased, which is a big part, probably why I'm adamant about being Haudenosaunee. It's not the whole reason. Sometimes you're just given that drive and determination, and I can feel my ancestors standing behind me, and they push hard. They
So
push hard.
you sought out your own learning through your tribe.
Yep. Yep. Started through what I could find for history, but then once I started meeting folks, I could ask some things. And then the more people I met, the more I was able to say, can I ask about this? Can I ask about that? And for the most part, folks were pretty kind, because they could see the hunger,
Mm.
right? They could see the determination, they could see the fire, they could see the drive. So they supported that, and that meant the whole world to me. Because when you have that kind of confusion growing up
Mm.
about who you are and where you come from, and then layer in a few more personal pieces, and you get somebody who's pretty confused. And so I really can relate to the teenagers with suicide ideation, because I struggled with that quite a bit when I was young.
Mhm.
I didn't
Yeah.
have the direction, I didn't have the support, I didn't. Yeah. And that whole identity thing, it's so big,
Mhm.
right? When you have that much confusion, then it's easy to see why people start to question themselves.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I usually I compare it to being lost, like,
Mm.
being homeless, but like in the sense of like you don't know who you are. It's like you have no compass if you're unclear, right? Of like where you come from and how to connect back to your roots and having a pride of where you're from.
Yeah.
Um,
I think also, even, it's hard for young folks when, like, I had a lot of certainty about myself, but it got questioned, it got gaslighted, it got squashed, it got oppressed. Yeah. Yeah.
and I think that's part that leads to part of my next question, which is, to both of you, did you ever get questioned on your nativeness because of being, multiracial or biracial, and having lighter skin?
All the time.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
And can you like speak to a little bit of like, maybe one experience? Because I heard all the time. So can you share a little bit of like an experience or how you were questioned? Go ahead,
Mm,
Amanda.
yeah, I mean, I just think, yeah, people all the time will say, "Oh, really? Like, how much native are you?" Which I always think is kind of weird. And then a lot of times, they say like, "Oh, I think I'm part whatever," another a tribe. Um, And yeah, so I've always thought it was kind of weird. And then because I'm like, even when I was younger, because I'm like, well, I am like, that's just my family. Like, we just are. So that was always kind of weird to me, I think. Um, and I actually learned something from one of my students that felt like she was white passing. And she always wears something like to identify her as Native. So whether it's like beadwork or a shirt that says something, yeah. So wearing something when you're in a space where you cannot see necessarily like identify another Native person, but that's been really great for me to be thinking about doing that. And then also, if I see somebody that is showing, is wearing something Native, to go up to them and talk to them, ask them if they're Native.
Mm-hmm. It's recognition. It's like being seen.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Carrie?
I find I do that as well. I have a couple of Haudenosaunee t-shirts that I wear, particularly with the ribbon skirt, like this whole last year when we've either been on the walk or doing actions or at court, or because I spent this last year standing for water and protecting water against Enbridge's Line 3 in Minnesota. And so I think for me, it's more, I'm so proud to be Haudenosaunee, so for me, it's specifically about being Haudenosaunee, and that's that purple, that's the Confederacy, our wampum, which shows all 5 nations. Yeah. Uh, that the other thing that I find so fascinating, and I just listen, like I listen to people, you can tell. So like most of the folks that I know on the res they're pretty chill. Like they're not going to question you. They're hella more polite than the white folks are for the most part, I mean, you've got some that are pretty protective and territorial. But it really does make a difference to know folks, and when you're doing things with the people in whose land you're a guest, they're just wonderful, and they watch out for you, and they introduce you, and they share the connection, and most of the people here have been so beautifully welcoming because they appreciate the gift and the sacrifice
Mm-hmm.
that most of the water protectors made over the last year. So that's the most recent and a positive, story. Um, yeah, in other spaces, I'm always really conscious of my privilege. I'm always really conscious of how I present. So I take extra care with my introduction. I give the family names. I say, all of the pieces that would really help um, folks help identify, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
that's just a respect thing.
Mm-hmm.
And for the folks who are going to question, I'm just like, don't even make me take out that they'll get a scolding about I don't need a pedigree like a horse or a dog, right?
Mm-hmm.
you
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
and one of the beautiful things that I got told right away when I was able to go back home, and that was just so powerful for me, and getting to meet people was just so amazing. And one of our spiritual elders just happened to be in the heritage house that day, and we were just talking, and she looked at me and she said, "You have one drop. That's all you need." And in you, that drop came through really loud. We see you. So I'm like, oh, that's cool.
But but it was impactful. I mean, it was impactful for you to be affirmed in that way. And I think that's what a lot of folks don't necessarily have access to, is someone who affirms them in their Native identity, especially when maybe their family, right, has assimilated so strongly that they really can't look to someone within their family to do that. And it's in conversations with young people that I get sparked, because I forgot how intrigued I was. Why I did a whole report in middle school about my tribe. I forgot how much I was in seeking my stories and my identity and my history through reading books. And when I talk with young people, they are so interested in the pieces of their identity. There's so many more kids, that are so many more multiracial children out in the world, and they want to know about all of them. They're not necessarily, at least my kids, they're really not interested in just being labeled into one. And I love it. And I just think what I wish is that there was more access available to them within their own family, because it feels awkward to show up at an event and not know, is this for me? It's not my tribe. I don't know anybody here, you know, is it genuine? Because I think I've even had feelings myself of like, this feels almost like I'm appropriating, because it's not it's not being taught to be by my own family and by my own tribe. Am I walking this line of, and then I question whether it's genuine. I don't know. What do y'all think about that? It's a weird feeling to have, to seek your history and identity outside of your family context.
I think there are parts of it that you can do, like, the history pieces, right, that I've shared with both of you about Haudenosaunee, and particularly Washington and the government and the colonists and all that. That doesn't exactly tell me who I am as a Haudenosaunee woman, though. And that, I think, comes more through if you can find the teachers. So this winter, I was real blessed. I got sent some information about 2 teachers who were doing specifically creation story, longhouse teachings, Haudenosaunee pieces that are strictly ours. And that made a huge difference, because our nation is real interested, well, all nations within the Confederacy, all 6 nations in the Confederacy are pretty interested in bringing their folks back home and sharing the teachings, like reclaiming, rematriating, realigning, bringing our folks home, right? And so those teachings have been able to go a little farther through a couple of teachers who are, working through grants, I imagine. And I would like so strongly encourage all the nations, just because of how much it's meant to me, to be able to access that, because it really does help my identity. There are questions that I find myself thinking about, and then getting to sit in on those teachings was like, oh, well, here's an answer for this, and here's why we do that.
Yeah, why we do the things we do.
Why we do
really
the thing. Yeah. Right. So like and this is a real interesting example, and it's kind of because it's current or relevant, right? Especially when we talk about love is love. And yet within the nation, and within other nations, you have folks who are really hoping and wanting, some more than maybe as respectful, about staying within the nation, or at least staying within Nativia, in Native America, and not marrying outside our ethnicity, at least as Native people, as indigenous to this land. And in Haudenosaunee, they still do arranged marriages. And so it was a very interesting conversation about why that is. And a lot of it had to do with, just because sometimes our hormones are running amok and we don't always choose wisely as young people. Right. And the clan mothers got a better take on, who's going to be a good fit for each other and how this can work and, all the things.
Yeah,
So
it's true.
right?
Pulling my mom card. Yeah, it's true.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, what about you, Amanda? Do you feel like, because I know you work with youth and again, like a lot of youth don't necessarily have a parent, right, who can, and for whatever reason, maybe they're in foster care, maybe that parent isn't in the household. Like, what do you think is a good thing to tell them to say, like, you should still pursue learning and being proud, like, in your Native identity, even if you may not have access to a family member who can directly pass down this knowledge and traditions to you.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I feel like a big percentage of the youth I work with have like similar stories. Like, we're urban Indians, and we've have like multiple generations of like a disconnect from our tribe and our land and our families, and not always of our families choosing to leave. And um, so I mean, I think the main thing is like relationships and community. I always share with my students like this support that we can give each other, and to take advantage of it, because it is unique, and like programs that we have, and just having like that indigenous knowledge being shared with us. I mean, I know our local tribes here um, are great about inviting other tribal people to programming and um, their cultural events, and to learn their language. So that's like a great place to go and feel welcomed and seen, and become part of the community and find your support systems. So yeah, and then like as they get more in the community, maybe they'll be able to find somebody from their tribe, or another family from their area where they're from or something. But I think just building that community is so important.
Yeah.
Can I just share here? Because I want to lift up what Mandy is saying, Tracy. Do you remember Mandy talking about being able to gather youth from a couple of different regions and do like an exchange, a cultural exchange? And so being able to have youth out here, especially Anishinaabe folks, but Turtle Mountain and that, and the little shell. Oh, sorry. I did something. Did I goof it up?
No,
Anyway,
we can just fine.
Yeah. So, I want to speak that again out into the ethers, because Lynn Big Boy from Bad River is still down to do that. And I just believe so strongly in giving youth that opportunity to come and meet with each other and do it, in like a different situation, like come to hunting camp or come to, a hide tanning camp or something, right? Berry picking, although that's kind of universal, but, sugar bush even. or they could learn one of the cultural pieces. Anyway, that just fostering that idea, because I think, the more that we can share that idea out there, then maybe somebody picks it up, with whatever group of people they've got, and folks watching this beautiful blog or listening to this beautiful blog might be inspired to do the same.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful idea because, when we talk about student exchange programs, it is to learn culture, and it's never usually thought of here, like within these lands, right? It's usually like going across the water to another country and not knowing the countries within these United States of blah, blah, blah. But, like it's a beautiful concept,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think before we end this kind of part of the conversation, we'll get into another part, but before we end it, I want to make sure to express like how like much it's meant for my kids to be a part of programming, through the schools. And I make them go to, events when they were younger, right? And didn't really have a choice. And, like to go to powwows, and this couple weekends ago, they, by choice as teenagers, wanted to go to a powwow and bring friends with them, right? And it just shows that those little, moments and memories, that those access to resources, access to programs, access to learning, even if not in their own tribal tradition, it really does fuel their continued interest and pride in that identity, because it's so easy for it to be invisible when you're mixed, right? Like my kids they don't, and you all know this, a lot of kids, they don't first identify as native if they're mixed and multiracial, if they feel like their nativeness will be questioned. A lot of times aren't, like you said, as urban Indians, that's not necessarily the way they identify first. And when they do, they tend to be questioned about it, or that part of them may be invisible, which I get why one of the students would say, no, I'm wearing I have to wear something so people know that I'm native, because the first assumption is that you're not, if you're white passing, right? And if you're black passing, I guess I've never really used the term black passing, but I think about our black native students, and I hear that from them a lot, that people don't want to acknowledge their native parts of their identities, which has something to do with the next question. So I wanted to ask, it's very complex when we're talking about racial justice and racism. Obviously the histories in this country are of oppression, genocide, intertwined between, Black, Indigenous, Latinx, immigrants from other countries. But it's pretty clear that we know in most recent times, with lighter skin, white passing, that there's some folks who are native but have access to a lot of privilege. They've assimilated well, right? There's white passing in a lot of different racial groups, but we're talking about white passing natives in this conversation. When do you think you became aware of your privilege as a lighter skin native person who could be perceived as being white passing? I include that. I include myself in that. There are people that have just assumed that I'm white, even though I'm lots of things. When did you become aware of that privilege and understanding? And how do you use that privilege and understanding in your work, like in how you just operate in the world?
For me, I think I learned that pretty young, and I think I learned it from the stories from my family. So my grandpa's a dark skin, and my grandma's lighter skinned, and so just their stories growing up, like specifically, well, even like being back home on the reservation, um, just like the way they were treated off. So there's like a more white town right outside of the reservation. So going into like different places, how they were treated. But then really coming out to Seattle and hearing like the way my grandpa was treated was different than my grandma. And yeah, so I think those stories early on. And then I guess recognizing as I was becoming an adult and working in um, native, like working for natives, like that's how I've always been working in native education. So and realizing like I'm super comfortable in white spaces, and I know I'm seen and heard, and kind of trying to use that um, to like get more of what I want for our native people, and seeing like that's actually like some power I have like over a probably a darker skinned person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And it takes a lot to admit that, Amanda. So I just want to say I appreciate that you're sharing that, because a lot of people are not willing when they have a story of oppression within their body. I think that's the part that's really hard for some, white passing natives, is like, it's hard to admit that there's some part of privilege you really have when there's a lot of harm and trauma in your story, in your family line. So I just wanted to name that that's not an easy thing to name. I appreciate that. Mm-hmm. How about you, Carrie?
Yeah, I knew pretty early on, by virtue of the fact that my mother and my brother are very beautifully brown. And I take after my dad in the Slovenian side of the family. So I have blue eyes and very light skin passing. There were times growing up where it was really, really difficult. My brother was really involved in sports, and he was a very good athlete. So, he was a starter in basketball. He was the captain of the football team, a small town in South Dakota, but they're the only two brown people in the entire town, right? And so when we would play Sisseton and we would play Eagle Butte, both of those schools are on the reservation. And it was always harder, and things were always more heated. And Kevin took a physical beating from everybody on that court, right? So that was hard to watch. But what was harder was that nobody talked about it in my family. And that used to frustrate me so bad. They refused to have any conversations about it. And I didn't like that at all. And I think for me, I end up being a little more, how would I say? I'm going to be the one stepping in front of, right? I'm going to be the one standing in between the beautiful brown people and those white folks who want to take it out on them. And I don't let that happen. I don't remember ever doing that for my brother, but I remember thinking it. And I did do that. In the small town where my parents had a home, and the librarian was going off on the two beautiful relatives from south of the border. And I stepped in front of those two women and I said, "You stop that right now. This is uncalled for, and I don't appreciate it, and I don't like it." So my job really is to interrupt it in the moment, because like I'm just kind of non-seeing. I'll say courageous, but, might be kind of foolish sometimes. But yeah, I mean, that's my first response, right? Probably because I wanted to for my brother when we were young, and I didn't, out of respect for him, because he didn't want it.
Yeah.
He didn't want it. But I remember, and there's another, oh my God. I mean, the stories, we all have stories of that, but one of the clearest ones for me was during Standing Rock. And an Anishinaabe friend that I had met out there at Standing Rock and I were in another library. Them white librarian ladies, I gotta say, sometimes, like, in small towns, okay, just in small towns. And this was in North Dakota, right, mind you. And she ignored Tanya. She ignored my friend and would only speak to me. And I said, I'm not the one asking you the question. You have the respect to talk to the woman who asked you the question.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, that, and, like, how can I say? I'm involved with the Stokes Collective, which is a big anti-racism movement in Minneapolis. And I'm doing anti-racism work there because I have privilege, because white folks find it easier to talk to me than they do my darker skinned friends and colleagues in this work. And we talk about that, we talk about that because I'm always the one wanting to say no, and they're like, sometimes yes, but maybe we want the point to get it across, and you can do that.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. I just like had a moment when you talked about just standing in the way of like, what would that look like if that happened in our schools today? Like, or out when these shootings are happening, and not that I'm saying white passing folks need to take bullets for people, but to stand up and like be in the middle and take maybe a verbal, whiplash of like negative slurs and to be the ones to stand in and say something. I've actually not witnessed that, and so it was just a moment for me. I was like, oh my God, that'd be like so beautiful if like that was happening all the time, because I think what's so critical about that notion is that was your brother. Yeah. And I think the failure is for white passing folks to forget that they are family. You have family that is brown. You have family that is Black. And when you look at someone, why assume that they're not worthy of your sisterly reaction to harm coming to them? And I think it saddens me to think that so many white passing folks, whatever the other part of their identity is, because they've been so told that they're white and they've been so accepted and they've received privileges and they've received positive affirmations for being white looking, white talking, white acting, is they truly have forgotten a connection that is so powerful and can bring such healing and could bring so much action in this world to like disrupt like this narrative. Because like you said, Carrie, they can talk to other white people from a very, very different place of a loving connection, and it be genuine. Wow. That one got me really stirred up.
Well, let me just close that portion maybe with this. So last year, and we saw it at Standing Rock too. And that's when we first saw it was like the white ministers, white women ministers, and even the white men ministers, the church folks, and they stood at the front of the line in between the police and we saw a lot of that on line 3. It wasn't just it was really heartening to see that more and more folks, and the majority of the arrests like there was over 1,000 arrests. A lot of folks like me had 3 or 4. Um, but there were still a lot of people, and it was the white folks in the very clear majority taking the arrests. And
Mm,
that was good to see.
mm-hmm.
That was
Yeah.
good to see. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I wish I could have seen it for myself. That's what I want. Like, I want this experience. I want the experience where I'm witnessing it, because I think, unfortunately, I don't witness a lot of courageous, standing up. And so hopefully this will inspire some people, because I feel like what I do hear a lot are from white passing Native folks. When I do trainings and conversations, come up to me later and they thank me for reminding them that there's a part of their identity that has been oppressed. And, they're willing to look at both the privilege that they have when it comes to in relation to other darker racial groups and communities. But they're more affirmed, and that just makes you more powerful when you're going to go do that work.
Yep.
So I just hope people are inspired, from hearing that part of our conversation. So what are your final messages that you want to share to our fellow mixed, multiracial, biracial, Native peeps out there who may sometimes get questioned about their nativeness? What would be the final words you'd want to share with them? Do you feel ready, Amanda?
Be in community.
Be in community. Yes. Anything else, Amanda? Brief is good. I'm just making sure there's nothing else stirring in your brilliant mind that you want to say.
Yeah, I think just that invite to come, be in community, and take that support and be that support also for others in our community.
That's a great call to action and invitation. How about you, Carrie?
I'm going to lift up Amanda. That's a beautiful place to end.
Absolutely. Well, I am so happy that the two of you are a part of my community, and that you both have invited me into the spaces that we've been in together and have made me felt welcomed and truly affirmed in every part of me, not just the Native part of me, but just to show up as I am and breathe life into me. So I'm just really supportive, really, really grateful for how much support I've gotten from the two of you, and the amazing work you do in Native communities with our youth. And thank you. Just thank you for everything you do and all of the words of wisdom that you've shared with the world today.
Tracy, I want to just take a minute and offer my gratitude to you for what you do, and for giving us this opportunity to come and share this heartfelt, intimate space with you about something that's so important to us, right? Essential, because it's identity, and it's about our hearts and who we are. And I feel real blessed and fortunate to be in on this with both you and Amanda. Thank you again for including me.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, ladies, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your time and take care of yourself.
Good reminder.